Hello and welcome to the MRI Safety Week video series brought to you by Metrasens. Today's video is about us, MRI practitioners. We're getting better, but MRI safety writ large is getting worse. How can that be? How can we square that circle? Those two things seem to be in direct contradiction. A little bit about me as your presenter. My name is Tobias, or Toby Gilk. I am a certified MR safety officer and MR safety expert, past member 2 times with the ACR's MRI Safety Committee and 2 times contributor to ACR guidance documents or the new manual. I'm a senior vice president of radiology planning and a founder of Gilk Radiology Consultants, GRC, and it is with and through GRC that I support Metrasens and their clients on MRI safety related issues. I am also a board member of the ABMRS, the American Board of Magnetic Resonance Safety, and I provide this disclaimer when I'm giving MRI safety talks. Essentially, I'm precluded from speaking on specific subject matter of the examinations of ABMRS exams, but I am allowed to encouraged to talk about MRI safety concepts and principles, which is what we're talking about today. So, MRI safety knowledge, what's between our ears, individually or collectively as an industry, how has that changed? Now, 2021 is the year of MRI safety, and we're essentially benchmarking ourselves 20 years of progress. So how is the body of knowledge today different than it was in 2001? Well, it's pretty remarkably different. So we had the original ACR white paper in 2002. We had an update document in 2004. We had the ACR guidance document when they changed the name of it in 2007. In 2008, the Joint Commission released a Sentinel Event Alert. In 2013, there was yet another update, revision, expansion to the ACR guidance document. And then most recently, just last year in 2020, a newly revised ACR manual on MR safety. So the body of information, literature, best practice on MRI safety, 2001 to today, couldn't be more different. There was really very little in 2001 that was popularly available, and now we've got a number of best practice standards and guidance documents available to us. Beyond that, we have, and maybe because of that, we have a much greater expanded body of knowledge and clinical awareness within MRI safety, and this applies to technologists, this applies to radiologists, this applies to radiology departments and administration and hospitals writ large. We tend to be aware of MRI safety in ways today that really didn't exist or didn't operate at the levels that they do today back in 2001. We have today accreditation criteria specific to MRI safety. Now, if you ask me outside of the context of this presentation, I will be more than happy to tell you that I think most of the accreditation standards are wet noodles, that they don't really do what they purport to do. Many of the standards are voluntary or recommendations. The ones that are explicit, I think, are more performative in a lot of cases than actually substantive in terms of tackling root causes of MRI accidents and injuries. But all that being said, with that whole body of caveats, we do have accreditation standards today that we didn't previously. Similarly, building codes and standards. We now require for new construction of hospitals and imaging centers, depending on the codes and standards that they're required to adhere to, which is governed in the US at a state level, there are minimum expectations of 4 zones and situational awareness and access controls and ferromagnetic detection, all to the benefit of MRI safety. And we have greater understanding of the MRI safety risks, in part because of better information from the MRI system vendors. We have better maps and clearer information about the spatial distribution of magnetic fields and magnetic spatial gradients or spatial field gradients. We know more about the spatial distribution and the amplitudes, magnitudes of time-varying gradients and radio frequency energies. So just in terms of the raw working material for MRI safety knowledge and decision making, we are in much better shape today than we were 20 years ago. Better, but is it enough? Well, I think the only thing that we can really compare ourselves against, measure ourselves against in MRI safety is safety incidents, accidents. If we're doing better, then we should be decreasing MRI safety adverse events. And unfortunately, that has not been the trajectory over this 20-year time period. You may have seen this graph or similar versions of it. The red line depicts percentage change in accidents, adverse event reports to the US FDA specific to MRI. The blue line represents changes in total MRI procedure volume. If we weren't getting any better or any worse, we would expect the red line to essentially overlap the blue line. As we did more MRI procedures, we would see proportionally more MRI accidents or adverse events. The fact that the red line is well above the blue line, 2.5 times the best fit curves, looking at the slope of those two lines, accident rates are growing more than twice the rate of organic procedure volume growth. Said very simply, we're injuring more MRI patients, both in raw numbers and in a proportion of the studies, than we were 20 years ago. And that is really, as I see it, the most important metric of whether we're doing what we need to be doing with respect to MRI safety. So why is this? How can it be that we know a whole lot more? We disseminate that knowledge much more effectively. We have codes and standards and accreditation criteria that maybe they're wet noodles, as I described, but they still exist now, whereas they didn't 20 years ago. We have better information from the MR system vendors. How, with all of this information at our fingertips and some additional codes and standards, how can this graph be true? Well, we need to compare not only how we've changed over that period of time, we need to look at that in the context of how MRI has changed over that period of time. Specifically, MRI-related risk factors. So what has changed in the last 20 years with respect to MRI risk? Higher acuity patients. 20 years ago, all of our MRI patients were walkie-talkies, knees, and heads. And now we're doing ICU and ED and trauma patients, acute cord compressions and stroke assessments. In our patients, we have a much greater number and variety of implants, devices, and foreign bodies. 20 years ago, there was big, bold disclaimers in every MRI system operator's manual saying, "Thou shalt not, under any circumstances, scan a patient in whom there is an implant or a foreign body." And today, depending on where you're located, a significant minority of your patients may have implants, devices, foreign bodies, onplants, piercings, things that would have been explicitly prohibited 20 years ago. And we're putting these patients into stronger magnets. We're using greater and greater quantities of radio frequency energy. Our patients themselves are larger, and if SAR and radio frequency energy deposition is a function of body mass, the fact that the body mass is bigger means we're putting more energy into the patients today, even at a consistent SAR rate than we were 20 years ago. Time varying gradients are more powerful and faster. We're experiencing increased throughput pressures and reduced staffing, and those two are largely results of reduced reimbursement coming for MRI procedures. So while we ourselves have indeed been getting better, MRI safety underneath us has been getting worse. And if we feel like all of this effort is for nothing, it's not for nothing. But we need to recognize that we are walking up the down escalator. And we're spending a lot of time and energy and effort trying to make MRI safety. And we haven't really stopped to evaluate whether the time and energy and effort are really producing the results that we want them to produce. Maybe we need to stop and reevaluate, reassess, and come up with better approaches. Because it's not really a question of how much sweat we produce. The proof is in the pudding. The proof is in reduced adverse event rates. So we need to identify the specific nature of the problem, problems, the individual contributing elements that produce MRI adverse events. And then we need to identify explicit preventative steps that interrupt those causes and help to keep MRI as safe as it can be for our patients, for the providers, and for the facilities. Thank you very much for joining us. We hope that you enjoy all of this week's MRI safety videos, courtesy of Metrasens. Please come back and watch the others. Thank you.